Hello, everyone. This is our Catskay. I'm here with Jupiter, MAGA, who is preparing to assassinate him in the background. I myself have a cat, which has his claws directly in front of my carotid artery, so we're both subject to animal assassination right now. And we are here to talk about. Well, you know what, Jupiter? I'm going to let you introduce the topic today.
Well, I believe it was the late great Admiral Akbar from Star Wars who said, "It's a trap." This coronavirus that somehow magically escaped from a Wuhan lab, and if YouTube decides to take us down for something that's our intelligence agencies are basically saying at this point there's pretty serious evidence, but regardless, whether this was planned or not, whether some underpaid, understaffed Wuhan lab had some guy walk out with bat semen on his shoes or whatever and cause this,
There's
or
a
it was purposeful, there is, at this point, in my opinion, incontrovertible evidence that people are taking advantage of this crisis in a way that seems planned, whether they planned it once it happened or after. I'll give you an example. First, they bring in Fauci, who says, "Oh, there's no problem here," and they bring in Birx. These are two unimpeachable characters. And as Tucker Carlson pointed out, Fauci has been a political creature for decades. Him and Chris Cuomo talk every night on the phone. Chris Cuomo admitted that. And so we based all of our economy shutting down, the entire West, on one doctor. Well, two, actually. The second is a British doctor who apparently was having an affair, had coronavirus. He said we need to shut down the entire West. And that's some guy in London. Very respected. So we did. Turns out he got coronavirus, broke quarantine to bang his mistress who has a family and children who she could have brought that back to them. So they don't really believe this is a crisis. Bill Gates is taking advantage of this in ways that are really sickening. But what we're going to explore today, and this was Katz's idea, are all the ways that countries, organizations, and individuals are taking advantage of this to implement things that could have never been possible had it not been for a global pandemic that turned out to not be so bad.
Yeah, it's definitely been bad for some, but
And we're not downplaying that.
yeah, but the Black Death, it is not. Um, it yeah, so like the idea that I had that sparked this whole thing was when I was watching one of my favorite other YouTubers, Chris Chappell, for China Uncovered. No, China Uncensored. Sorry, America Uncovered, and he mentioned that that Hong Kong is now basically a complete prison. And I just had a random thought while I was watching that because he's talking about how things have changed in Hong Kong. Oh my God! Okay, go away. That was my warden. He's also keeping an eye on me. Um, China has been struggling with Hong Kong for over a year now. They have a very visible problem of people that, for some reason, want autonomy, despite the Chinese best efforts to suppress it completely.
Disgusting.
I know. But with between their unhealthy desire for autonomy and the international community insisting on, observing these arcane concepts called human rights, China's been unable to completely crush Hong Kong. Well, it turns out that if you have a pandemic, that gives China the perfect excuse to go in, completely shut everything down, and yeah, it also gives a very good reason to not question why all of a sudden so many of the people who were uh, a thorn in their side politically, well, they're sick or
Or
gone
dead.
or
Or
dead.
gone.
Yeah, it was the virus. It was not Uncle Jijing.
And look at just to interject, look at Michigan, Governor Whitmer. Look at
Oh,
the
the woman.
authoritarian tyranny she's imposing on everybody. If
Mhm.
you can do that in America, imagine what you can do in China with this
Oh,
pandemic.
it's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And although this has been undoubtedly really terrible for China's economy, the big difference is that the Chinese Communist Party, does not actually care whether their people suffer or not. I mean, I suppose all governments to a certain degree have elements of people who just see their people as resources in any system. But in China, I don't think they bother even disguising their complete lack of interest in individual people. So, in China, they don't have problems with, barricading people inside their homes, letting them starve to death. Um, so yeah, they've suffered and they've lost a lot of money, but there were a lot of other things that China has been able to do that were previously quite difficult for them to do. And you brought up an interesting example about Huawei in France, I believe. That is, why don't you explain what you were telling me about it?
So when the pandemic starts, and I'm sure all of you know, but just to quickly reiterate, when the pandemic started, China knew. China, a lot of people died. A lot of people died. And they started buying up before they told the world that there was a pandemic, while Fauci and the World Health Organization were assuring us it's no big deal. They were buying, in my opinion, the Chinese Communist Party time, because in those 8 or 9 days, China purchased almost all of the available PPE that was not already contracted, and even bought up some contracts, outbid contracts that were already in. And so they stockpiled gowns, masks, etc. So all of a sudden, China, who was a net exporter of PPE, protective gear for doctors and nurses, all of a sudden, a net exporter was importing more than you could believe. And that, of course, didn't raise any flags because everyone's in the tank for China. And so just the other day, I'm reading, and apparently France, who is in dire need, as we all are, of PPE, France went to China and was like, guys, can we have some PPE? Our people are dying. And they said, yeah, sure, but you need to agree to take our 5G towers, because the West, before the virus, was unwilling to allow China's 5G into the West for numerous reasons. Health concerns, security concerns. It's obviously hacked. Huawei is just a branch of a larger company called the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party.
It's a very profitable business.
Very profitable for them, not for the Chinese people, but they are taking advantage of it in a way that's so blatant. They unleash this virus on the world, and then when we grovel and put our, drop to our knees and like, we'll suck your commie dicks, just please give us PPE, and they're like, yeah, fine, but you need to do what we say. This is extortion.
You want PPE? Well, then let us give you 5G.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right.
And this is happening in a variety of ways, like that. I'm sure a lot of which we're
Wait,
not.
hold on. It sounds like there's hammering in my house somehow. Sounds really loud in my background. Oh no, that was Porter.
Yeah, Porter.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That's right. I'm sure this is happening in a variety of ways that we're not even aware of. That we're in 1,000 ways. My God, good sir, what have you done? You have ruined this production.
I really have. I'm sorry. There's just this super loud noise in the back of my house, and I can't stop it. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. This is the moment that KAGGOT stopped working.
Yeah, we're not working. If there's anyone hammering in the house, please stop the hammering.
You know who's hammering? The CCP. Well,
it's Lawrence O'Donnell. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Last interruption.
But no, I mean, I'm sure the Chinese government is leveraging 1,000 tiny little arguments where before China was not necessarily the ideal choice, or people were actively opposed to some Chinese product or service letting them in. And now because like, for instance, like we hear about France and Huawei because those are big players. But who knows whether, like, say, Uganda, for instance, whether they're like, we desperately need PPE, and they're like, okay, well then give us this valley, just the whole valley. And would we ever hear about it? But I have no idea if this actually happened. I'm just using this as an example. But I don't find it too hard to imagine that China is just really using their leverage with being the only people that have large amounts of PPE to bully smaller players.
You know what? I never even thought of that. We've talked in previous episodes, or maybe we haven't. We've talked on the phone a lot about this. How China is mining all of Africa. They're setting up infrastructure. They're basically just decimating Africa's resources. What we're going to talk about in this episode will kind of prove to you that we think that further down the road, we're going to find out what they've actually been doing, like even the more horrible stuff, because that comes out later and then no one cares because it's not relevant. But what we're going to talk about in this episode will give you probably zero doubt that right now there are Chinese operatives all over the world exploiting this coronavirus. But the big issue is they're not the only ones. Our fellow countrymen of all of our countries, the West, our America, England, France, Germany, Italy, there's exploitations all over the place. And globalists and leftists are finding new avenues to implement policies that no one's ever wanted. For instance, in California, Governor Newsom is now talking about mail-in ballots in ballot harvesting. Mail-in ballots are by far the most corrupt form of voting, and people say, well, you think that because you don't want blacks to vote. I'm not going to go into the mail-in ballot scheme spiel, but basically what it is you'll have activist organizations going and saying, hey, do you like this going to people's doors? Elderly, minorities, everyday people that aren't really up to or politically savvy, and say, hey, can we get your vote? We want to do this for you and this for you. And they're like, sure. Or they'll fill it out for them and dead people will vote and all sorts of stuff. So what the leftists are implementing right now are things that the general public has rejected since our country's inception. But they're using this virus to put these things forward. Now, if they couldn't do it before, why can they do it now? Because we've given them literal tyrannical power. We did our episode on how we don't have rights, we have privileges because rights can't be taken. The things they're doing right now, disallowing protest in New York, like Bill de Blasio, that's illegal. It's literally illegal.
I agree. And people basically are in a position where they feel like they can't fight back. And in some ways, you could argue they can't really. Because, I mean, in America, we can have our protests. In a lot of places in America, we have guns. And we're, very used to asserting ourselves when we are feeling like we have no other avenue. But there's a lot of people who are just sort of stuck. Like, if you don't have a car, you don't have a gun, you're just some regular person in an apartment somewhere. I can't hear you. Are you talking?
No.
Oh, sorry. If you're just a regular person somewhere, you're completely isolated. And most people are just sort of, being conditioned to just sit there and think like, oh, well, that's weird. Or I don't like that, but what am I going to do about it?
Well, there's that lady in California. No, Texas. God forbid I call Texas California. And she fought back.
Yeah, the salon owner.
She's raised, as of 2 days ago, like $220,000, probably more. Not her, but people GoFundMe crowdsourced for her, and she made all sorts of money. And people are starting to fight back, but we need more like her. Here's the problem. If you look at what's happening with things like that, they're isolated examples. We know them. Like the guy who parasailed, or the guy who paddleboarded. Remember, he was paddleboarding away from the sheriffs? Well, these people are heroes. They're national heroes, yet none of us are doing anything about this. The exploitation thing is that right now, every single day that goes by, they're taking more power that we'll never be able to get back. Believe me. So if we start allowing, they're talking about November, how they're not going to be holding elections. Like, this is wild. November.
It honestly, like, it's so hard to even argue with people with this, because here's the thing, like, we have one truth for the federal system as far as, like, what is a good idea, what's not. Like, we have the experts talking, but each state, the governors, I had no idea governors had this much power.
Me neither.
I mean, I don't know if that means I'm ignorant or if this is a new thing, maybe some combination. But I mean, like for instance, if Newsom doesn't want in California, doesn't want us to be able to, get out and um, go to the ballot, things like that, then that's going to fundamentally alter politics. No matter whether or not there, even if there wasn't a huge fraud problem, which I'm sure there would be, like with mail-in, but even if there wasn't, like this is altering the way politics is done. People are being told whether or not they can vote, whether or not, because there are so many people who go into the ballot, who go into the poll stations on election day and vote. Not a lot of people are signed up for mail-in, and even if they try to roll this thing out in a very orderly way, there's going to be, how many people are going to be there with like, oh fuck, I was supposed to vote today, and they realize that they never sent it in.
Or look at the and the elderly too, but look at the app they made. Remember for that primary?
Oh, didn't that go terribly wrong?
Yeah. You think?
That.
But you said you were either ignorant or this is a new thing that governors have these powers. Well, in Michigan, Governor Whitmer, who's obviously, other than Cuomo, the most famous governor in all of this. Meanwhile, the person who should be the most famous is Ron DeSantis, who's just done a glorious job. The man just
South Dakota or
Florida.
Oh, yeah.
The man deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. No one handled this better than Florida. Cuomo and the media were all saying Florida's going to be 10 times worse than New York. It's a ticking time bomb. They have by far per 100,000, and for their what they were doing, they opened the beaches, put all their resources into the nursing homes. So, but Whitmer, back to the governors having this kind of power. Whitmer, her state representatives, and literally the whole state assembly were like, no, Whitmer, you're done. We're opening here. We're doing this. And she goes, no. And they were like, wait, you can't say no. Her lawyers found a bill from 1945, a law from 1945 that grants her, in an emergency like this, powers that stretch so far beyond what the Constitution. It's probably an unconstitutional law. It was during wartime that it was passed.
And I believe they're suing her for this, aren't they?
Yes, they are suing her. And Godspeed. But this is showing, back to the exploitation angle, if you can name me one red state governor, one Republican governor, rather, that is tyrannical right now, and the president, who they were saying, is a Hitler, he's a dictator for all these years, and now they're saying he needs to take more power. Well, all the tyrannical forces that we've seen, the judge Moye in Texas, who put that lady in jail for not apologizing for opening her salon,
because that's an abuse of power.
Whitmer, de Blasio, all of these tyrants that are coming out are all liberals. And they all know what's best for you. They're doing it because you rubes don't understand. And all the leftists on Twitter and all the pundits are saying, oh, I can't wait till we lose a bunch of Trump supporters over this. They are showing their faces. The Republicans are all saying, or the conservatives are all saying, open the economy, and their states are doing great. They're focusing on what they should. The elderly, the old folks' homes, where 25% of all this is happening. And the liberals, Cuomo, your boy Cuomo, just even admitted, he goes, wait, all the deaths are people staying at home, like almost all of them. How is this happening? And all of them are in the old folks' homes that I forced to take COVID patients.
Our perfect plan. Our final solution has failed. I can't believe I just said that.
No, their final solution has actually not failed. Their final solution is working. This is Bill Gates' plan all along. He's talked about population control for so long that and he is, I just want to say one thing, Birx, that the lady with the scarves, Fauci's right hand, or rather the female counterpart, she said the other day, she was speaking, and she goes, well, the guidelines as given by Gates, the federal government, swear to God, I have it.
Oh my God.
I will, anyone interested, go to @Jewpiter_ on Twitter. You all know my Twitter. I will post this. It's her by accident saying Gates is giving the guidelines. And of course, even though vaccines never been made within 1 or 2 years, he all of a sudden has all these vaccines. This is exploitation. This is, if you think Soros is scary, Gates, man, that dude, there's you know what's the difference between Soros and Gates is?
What?
Soros is we all know about him. We all know he funds all these leftist organizations. He's evil. He's one of the heads of Hydra. We know that. We all look at him like he's scum. Gates, he's almost universally loved and seen as a philanthropist.
Except by Windows users.
Except what?
Except by Windows users. We knew that he was evil from the first. Back in Vista, we learned that he was an evil man.
True, especially Vista. But let me ask you this. Do you think that all right, did I tell you the story about my Uber driver, my black Uber driver?
You have so many stories about Uber drivers, I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know if anyone knows this. I take like 2 or 3 Ubers a day, so. But black Uber driver, and by the way, the old white liberal Uber drivers, they won't let you get in the car without a mask. And they'll be like, it's state law. And you're like, no, it isn't. That's only that anyway. But so I'm in the car and we're talking about COVID. And by the end of the trip, one of the best Uber rides I've ever taken, the guy was a genius, but he was like, I don't know what they want my man to do. He goes, I didn't come into this political. He goes, but Trump is in between a rock and a hard place. It's either we shut this whole country down for more and more. My tenants aren't paying rent. I have 3 rental properties. And he goes, if this continues, I'm going to be broke. You're going to be broke. We're all going to be broke. And he goes, the death rates just aren't what they said they would be. He goes, so if Trump shuts down the economy and it crashes, it's his fault. And if he opens it up, he wants to kill everybody. And I was like,
preach.
Slay King.
Slay.
People are waking up. But my question is, do you not think that this is making more Trump supporters? Because I think that people are seeing that if anyone could bring an economy back, it's the guy that built this great economy.
I think if this is exposing anything, it's that leftist solutions, particularly American leftist solutions, do not work in times of crisis. Arguably at all, but it's easy to look successful in times of prosperity and peace. But right now, it appears that leftist logic, to use a colorful phrase, does not hold under the strain of a crisis, under a pandemic or anything. It's leftist-controlled states. The democratically controlled states are all falling apart, and they seem to have no idea what to do. And maybe that's because the leftist solution is always to appeal to an authority or a group, or to defer individual responsibility and try to work for the greater good, which there's a certain logic to that, but it doesn't help when you need individual determination. I think you could argue that more conservative states, and this is of course broad, there are no scientific rules about this, but it is interesting that conservative states seem to be doing better, and maybe that's because conservatism encourages people to be self-reliant and resilient. And so states that are based on more individualistic principles trust people to use their judgment, and people are able to better gauge, in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, what they need to do for their lives because they know better. Well,
that's the Sweden thing. Like, Sweden chose to not shut down their economy. They, some lady was on Fox saying she was a Swedish diplomat, and she said, well, we have great trust in our government in Sweden. We have to. Our country's run by the government. And they said, look, use your better judgment. Don't, and this isn't a conservative thing, obviously, they're not conservative, but they, we encourage our old people to stay at home. We encouraged our, certain businesses to socially distance themselves from others and wash your hands. And they're already almost at half, I believe, herd immunity. While the rest of us, you can't stop this. Like, I'm watching, I take my debit card or my license, or the people at Walgreens they have gloves on, okay? And they've been touching all of this stuff, cash, debit cards and they're handing it back to each other. I'm touching my mask. And what ends up happening is people
It's theater.
start. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What ends up happening is people start passing this back to each other no matter what. That's why people are dying in their homes more than they are on the bus. What Sweden did was they gave in to the inevitable. They're like, look, we're going to get this. You can't stop a virus like this.
Mm-mm.
Their economy is fine. They took a little hit. We've taken trillions of dollars. We are getting murdered. So my point is, this is an exploitation, and we're losing. This is purposeful. It's a plan. Sorry, I lost my. I totally froze.
No, it's fine. And this, I feel like a lot of us are just sort of cracking under the strain of this, because it's just, we're surrounded by this omnipresent problem that is shrouded in, I don't want to, it's not mystery, but like misinformation and contradictions. No one thinks the same thing. No states are agreed. No countries are agreed. The only thing we can really agree on, and maybe this is where we'll try to tie this off at, is that there are people out there that are trying to use the situation to advance ideas that wouldn't normally be permitted. And who was that man you were talking about?
Solinsky.
Don't let a crisis go to waste. And
well, Rahm Emanuel said that, but it's a strategy and rules for radicals by a man called Solinsky. Our viewers know who he is. I trust me.
And just everyone keep aware that, like, just in the same way that, like, China is saying, like, sure, you can have the PPE if you use our 5G, and all these governors in the states are, using their power to advance often agendas which have nothing to do with Corona. Just make sure you understand that just because there's a crisis going on doesn't mean that everything is part of it.
Yeah. Keep your head on a swivel. That's the best place to end, is just, if you're seeing things in your state, like a buddy of mine, and Scott Pressler, by the way, also is there. They're going to do some protesting and cleaning up. But if you see exploitative actions by your politicians right now, stand up before it's too late. They'll never give you these privileges back. Yes, privileges, not rights. We don't have rights.
All right, everyone. Remember, you are a human being, not a cog, and let's just get through this together.
I'm not an animal. I'm a human being. By the way, this is called the animal episode because our animals were going wild and driving me crazy.
I'm going to, I have 7 cats, and I think I'm probably going to I may not have any cats by the end of this episode.
Yeah, I'm sending her to Wuhan, to the wet markets. She'll be
to the dog food factory. Oh, geez, poor Mega. All right, everyone. Oh my. I'm just ending it now.
Hit like, subscribe. Sorry for the chaos this episode, but just as every other business, and ours is obviously a very large operation, there's chaos right now. Blame China and the globalists.